How's everybody doing today? Hopefully everybody's been good and doing good things and other things that fall under that same exact category. So yeah, I've basically just been, making these types of videos talking about being able to understand God and, being the worksman on the table and realistically trying to get to that level to where I'm at right now. That's very important and very crucial for you as a Christian, for you to actually be able to, integrate it inside of your characters and your daily routines. I already have that type of lifestyle, and I had that lifestyle as well, where it's just busy and busy, busy, and I got to do this and I got to do that. On top of, just owning up to the fact that you would much rather prefer to do other things because some of these things just is hard. I know it's very difficult to be able to get these, practices and virtues to actually be integrated inside of your lives and your routines and your characters because you're barely starting out. But understand that you need to be committed to that way of thinking, as well as having that level of understanding when you actually are, beginning to be these sort of Christians, to practice what I actually have been preaching in these sort of sermons, videos. That way you actually are able to, you know, not be so discouraged when you don't see the results that you want to see, and also be able to confront the issues as to, and the reasons as to why, you aren't seeing any of the results that you want to see, because more or less it's just because you're wasting your time. You're trying to do these things at your own pace. This is the reason why. Top of you actually just, generally not being so driven and focused, and you think that it's going to be easy or it's not going to require as much work as you actually think. I mean, other than that, I already have common knowledge. You have families, you have things to do, you have work and other things like that, but none of these can obviously get in the way of your, walk with Christ and the type of, duties that He actually has for you to do and the types of good works that He obviously wants you to do. This is just something that I needed to get across as well. The misconception that many individuals just have is that they don't have the ability to be able to understand God while they're walking here on earth, or that they never will be. I mean, for the most part, His ways are higher than your ways, and His thoughts are higher than your thoughts. But you can totally understand God, and that's just something that you need to be able to understand. He's made Himself perfectly clear in the scriptures, in the gospel itself, to be able to get you to understand what your overall goal is, to be able to understand Him. And so many individuals want, God to understand them, but they don't want to actually understand God or any of those types of things themselves. They want God to hear them out on everything, but they don't ever want to hear God out on a single thing. And, that's just one of the saddest things about it, is just that they continue, having this sort of stress and strain on their reconciliation process with God. They're not actually realistically able to reach that level of, peace and reconciliation with Him, because they're still trying to do these things on their own terms. They're very immature. They lack a lot of maturity, and they more or less want to be the guides of their own lives, and they don't want to let God actually be the author of their lives, and other things like that. But rest assured that you could obviously understand God. This is not something that is too far out of the comprehension for man or of man or whatever. You could comprehend, you could understand, and it's basically that, it just could be said in this one little sentence, that your entire life here on earth is only the formative period for heaven. And this could branch off to many other different means and understandings according to the knowledge you already have, that you're only meant to bear fruit while you're walking here on earth, as well as being able to engage yourselves in spiritual warfare to finally be able to get to that point, to that level of you, not being such cowards, and realistically really putting, God at the center of all of your lives, and every single form that is going to take and going to come, because just how God sees these things. When you begin getting afraid of the enemy, that you don't want to actually fight the devil, or you don't want to fight for the innocent, the weak, or whoever, that's when you begin to put you begin to replace God at the center of your life, and you begin placing, Satan at the center of these things, because you begin to have more faith in the devil and what he can do to you, instead of having more faith in God and what he obviously is capable of doing. And that's just the main issue of it all. It's a sin for you to doubt in God and his ability, and to put that much faith in the devil is an enormous sin. So you definitely have to suffer double for these sort of things. And it's just like, it's completely unnecessary. If everything is in the Bible and everything in the gospel is just faith based, why don't you just take the leap of faith for some of these things? I already have common knowledge. I already have that experience, right? That's what I was trying to say. I have that experience as well, where I was just super scared, and I didn't want to actually hit the enemy where it hurts, because of he was hitting me where it hurts. But finally, when I was actually able to really take the leap of faith and really do those sort of things, that's when I was actually able to see the results that I'm seeing my day and age. And if I'm able to see these sort of results, and obviously you're going to be able to replicate these same exact results for your lives. That's something that the devil doesn't want. That's something that his followers don't want. They don't want you to accept that as truth. That way you actually do apply it to your lives. They don't want you to accept any of these messages, or for you to actually equate the fact that my experience means truth. That way you actually do apply these sort of principles to your lives, because you definitely will finally repent with works meet for repentance, instead of the same old, well, it's all in the Lord's timing type of lazy approach that all these typical Christians just tend to gravitate towards, because they're still infants in the faith, and they don't realistically have all that level of faith and all that type of knowledge, which is just the overall sad thing about it. And they don't recognize how much of a baby Christians they actually are, because they've been Christians for how many years, like 5 years, 10 years. But they're viewing these things through carnal means and through the eyes of men, and they're not viewing these things according to how Christ obviously is able to see, as a rational spirit and as a logical being. He's obviously able to view these things at that level, what you are too afraid to admit within yourself, and what individuals are too polite to say. Christ is not a respecter of persons. He will definitely mock you to your face to get his point across, especially if you're being stubborn and stiff-necked, and you don't want to hearken or listen to any of those sort of advice and counsels that other individuals give you, and especially your parents. That's just like 10 times worse, just because of the fact that your parents, you're already obligated to listen to your parents, because they're your parents, so you have to honor them, your mother and your father. And then for you to just not even bother taking their advice and learning the hard way is just something that is completely unnecessary and very frowned upon in God's eyes. It's just that your parents are like walls. They're like wells of fresh living water, of all the advice and experience accumulated that they essentially have had in their entire life. Then for you to just be in that immature state of mind, and just to completely dismiss and negate everything that they say, when they already have been on the same road that you've been on, regardless of whether they were Christians or not, it would just be completely foolish. If you tend to gravitate towards the wisdom and wise sayings of those sort of things themselves, I would advise you to listen to your parents and do certain things like that. And sins and other things like that, obviously, is just common sense. Don't listen to them if they tell you to sin. Being homosexual is fine, or whatever the case may be like that. Obviously, you already have common knowledge and common ground in those sort of things, that those things are sins in God's eyes, and they're always going to be sins forever, as well as the law of Moses and other things like that. But it's just the overall misconception that individuals have, that everybody just tells them these sort of messages that you can't understand God, that God's ways are so superior, and because you can't understand his ways and these sort of things in themselves, that's why you'll never know God's plan for your life and other things like that. That is a flat out lie. That is one of the many false doctrines that have subtly crept inside of the church, for many individuals to not be able to to be able to let go, and to realistically really come to a knowledge and a better understanding of who their creator actually is. Basically, to understand God is to know why every single one of these trials and situations end up coming inside of your life, and all of these things in themselves have to deal with your eternal character. That's why every single one of these test trial situations and scenarios just end up coming inside of your life. In short, that's the real reason as to why. It's to form your eternal character, is to produce growth and maturity out of your mindsets and mentalities, that we are actually finally able to let go of how you were approaching certain situations, how you were coping with certain things, and just being able to finally let go of all um, your restraints and your walls, to finally let them fall, and to finally be able to trust God that everything's going to be fine. You could be vulnerable with other individuals, and Christ is obviously going to back you up, because he's going to judge you according to what you're already commanded to do. And another individual is going to have to answer for their sins and their actions, and you're going to have to answer for yours. And it's realistically that simple. You can't let other individuals get in the way of your walk with Christ, or your supposed discipleship with Christ, or your Christian walk with Christ, just because of the fact that it's you and they're not you. And they're going to have to answer to Christ as to why they let other individuals get in the way of being able to love their neighbors or love their enemies. And obviously hopefully you're able to discern as to the reasons as to why people act the way that they do. And that's just the real reason is why they just are trying to impress their friends. They're trying to be people pleasers. They're trying to do so many other different things like that this secular lie just encourages and wants every individual to do for the damnation of other individuals. And so if once you actually do step back and look at the bigger picture, it's just one encouraging mess of jumping off a bridge. And it's just like your mother and your father essentially said, if your friends jump, are you going to jump too? And obviously every single one of these individuals are saying yes, and the proof is right there, because all of them are just discouraging one another to being nice and to finally being the bigger person. And nobody realistically wants to step up to the plate and be that sort of person. And you have to be that person for yourself, for your family, to lead by example and not just by mere words or other things like that. And that's just the whole premise of this video. I mean, it's not the main video what I actually wanted to talk about in this. I was going to talk about some other things just because the spiritual side of it, and now for you to actually be able to understand as to why all of these situations actually do come inside of your life, for you to understand God, and for you to know for certain why he does the things that he does, and why he puts all these sort of trials inside of your lives, whether you actually get fired, whether your car ends up getting wrecked, somebody T-bones you at a light. All of these things themselves have to do with producing a healthy character out of you, and that's the main point, and that's the main premise. Once you realistically figure out the intent as to why your life is the way that it is, and the purpose and the meaning of life, what it actually is for everyone, not just you, then obviously it's going to be 10 times better. So even though the secular individuals who haven't realistically taken the gospel for salvation, or Christ for salvation, they're still under the same exact jurisdiction and law itself. It's a law. I mean, hopefully you're able to discern it as that. Whether they completely reject Christ obviously has not completely rejected them. He is obviously still doing everything that he possibly can to ensure that these individuals are able to benefit the most out of it, if they choose to change their mind, because this is like storing credit for themselves, and when it's just building a healthier and healthier character for them. And when they finally do, it just looks 10 times better, right? It's like, even though despite all odds, these individuals still wanted to do the right, even when they weren't saved, but they still get judged for their sins. That's something that you can't dismiss or be so dismissive of when you actually are going on about your days and your regular lives. Because that's just what ends up happening. That's just how good Christ is, and Christ being judged, obviously he's able to, it's not to say he softens the blow, because he still gives the blow, and the blow is pretty harsh. It's just the fact that when he actually hits you, and you just start crying out to God, and you begin crying because it hurts that bad, and you don't ever charge God with a sin or ever accuse him or anything like that, it just has that much more merit to it, and you benefit that much more to it. So it's like, well, yes, it's just kind of like a parent and a child. It's like the worst action that you've done, the more severe the punishment, the more severe the beating, and the child just goes up and hugs the dad either way afterwards, after he gets so beat by his father after he made a mess. That's basically the situation that I'm trying to get across your head, that you're actually able to benefit that much more from it. And obviously Christ does feel bad, but you're also in the wrong. So that's still the overall premise that you need to be able to understand. That's the intent as to why every single one of these situations and problems end up coming inside of your life, because you weren't actually able to grasp it. And because of it, you get confused by certain situations, why certain things are happening to you. So this is obviously just to dispel that confusion out of your lives. That way you actually are able to realistically really discern and recognize the intent behind these sort of trials, tests, and tribulations. Whether you're a Christian or not, you're still under that law. And every single thing that is happening inside of your life is to be able to perfect your eternal character. So because these things are meant to, perfect your eternal character, you're obviously supposed to do the good because of the, the maturity aspect that it produces and the growth that it actually produces on your part and on your end. Because of your mentality, you're not thinking like a child where you actually are throwing a temper tantrum, which many of these 45-year-olds are doing. You're obviously thinking like a grown adult, rationally, logically. You're actually able to discern, slow down time for yourselves to be able to process what is just going on and happening in that current situation in that time, instead of you just being so hasty and impulsive, right? I know in the secular world is generally and typically praiseworthy. Everybody's like, "Oh, wow, that's good. You're very composed, and you're able to keep your composure even though you're like waiters or waitresses. You're being a good waitress, and these individuals are clearly being rude, and you still don't care. And you're just like, well, no, I don't really care. And it's just like this is just my job, and other virtuous characteristics like that. But you need to be able to discern and recognize that you need to begin adapting and practicing out right away. But for the most part, yeah, I mean, that's basically understanding God right there. As to the reasons and the things that He puts inside of your lives, He just puts anything and everything in your life. And that's just something that you need to be able to confess and accept. He's not gonna, just make things super comfortable for you because He's God and He can, and He has the ability to. He's going to do anything and everything that He possibly can to you, and because it's obviously going to benefit you if you let it benefit you. If you don't want to let it benefit you, it never will, and that's pretty sad. Or it could, but you're not going to benefit as much as if you just would let it benefit you, and that's just a sad thing about it. And many individuals are just with this mentality and this way of thinking that God has to serve them and bend over backwards for them, and just completely ignorant of the fact that of the intents behind these sort of trials and tribulations, and they think that just because they're not saved, it's not going to happen to them, or they're not going to have to deal this suffrage. So it's kind of like dumbing themselves down, right? And they think that they're finally going to be able to escape the wrath of the Lord, because I don't see it, therefore it won't happen, or however that saying goes. I don't see it, therefore it isn't there type of principle. And that's what these individuals basically live, but they just close their eyes and the beating is just coming full speed ahead. But so yeah, I mean, this is a pretty basic principle for you to actually be able to understand and grasp. For you to be able to retain it would be another story entirely, and that would just be on your own use of time, if you're actually making good use of it, or you're just wasting it, you're doing whatever you want, you're playing video games, watching TV, doing other things like that, basically, that is just going to take away your time from meditating from these sort of things, reading the Bible and doing those sort of principles themselves, that realistically really gets you to saturate yourselves in the Word to the point that everything that breathe, and eat is good things, wisdom, wise sayings, and you completely just dispel all of the the carnal side of things that were just inside of your mind that were retained. You're forgetting the old, the nasty and the vile ways that you used to cope with these certain situations. You in short have brainwashed yourselves, and that's just a principle that you actually need to be able to understand, that you need to begin brainwashing yourselves, because the means that you were coping with these sort of situations, or how you were approaching these sort of things themselves, was not the correct way to do it according to Christ's eyes and according to God's foreknowledge. You need to obviously be able to what is that word? I'm trying to think of it. You need to be able to see things according to how God wants to see these things, and finally be able to be bold enough to see, how miserable your lives in short really are. And I've already been there, and this is just something that I realistically really want to get across to individuals. That everybody's going to be there, and everybody has been there. I've already reached that point in my life where I viewed myself as, Christ essentially just opened my eyes to how pathetic I actually was. That's not something that, pathetic is a pretty strong word, and that's just something that you need to be able to recognize, that I'm saying it in the same sense that you actually are able to understand, in the same sense that you actually say it to other individuals, like, wow, that's so pathetic. And I was actually able to finally reach that level of, a sentience within myself, of how pathetic I am sure was. And that's just something that Christ actually wanted me to understand. It sucked. I was like, wow. I don't know what I was thinking. It's not like I thought that I was hiding it from God. I know that God knows everything, but I thought that God would actually be polite towards these sort of things, and he wouldn't actually address any of the patheticness of myself that I already had acknowledged and was aware of. But I was doing these things according to my own pace, and doing other things like that. But because I was finally able to admit, how pathetic I am sure it was, and how, Christ was actually able to see those sort of things, it actually produced change inside of my life. And had he, never opened my eyes, I probably would have still stayed stuck in that same way of thinking, where I just thought that Christ is going to continue being that polite for the rest of our relationship and the rest of the time that I'm here on earth, and nothing else is going to happen. But realistically, you really need to open your own eyes for yourselves and be able to realistically really look at yourselves from a rational level, and be seeing, the types of behaviors that you are just acting and living out, and be able to finally confess it. Yes, man, I'm sure pathetic, and it's just the exact same principle as the Laodiceans, that I'm barefoot, blind, naked, and poor, and here I am thinking that I'm rich, clothed, wealthy, and all these other things, because I'm actually able to take care of myself. And yet you're selling sin, you're selling cigarettes, you're selling liquor, you're doing so many other different things that realistically, if you were still living in the same mentality as you were a kid, when you were just trying to do everything good and trying to do good things, you would have never taken the jobs that you actually have taken to sell these sort of sins. But because it's just so you're just so desensitized by it, because everyone else is actually doing those sort of things, uh you think it's all right because everybody's doing it. But in reality, God is judging you for all of those sins. He's judging you for every single cigarette that you sell. That's pretty serious and severe. But as well as the liquor, do you want to be held responsible just because you sold liquor to an individual who ended up getting into a car accident that day? Nah, man, this is just such a horrible feeling, to feel that you feel responsible for actually selling a bottle of liquor to someone, and for what? Just for them, and for that individual to get into a car accident. I mean, that's a lot of guilt. I already have common knowledge, that individuals typically they hold themselves to this perfect standard of, I should have, stopped myself. I should have been smarter. I should have done, should have, would have, could have type of, situations. And it's just pretty sad for everyone, right? Because we know better, and yet what ends up happening, you always end up falling into the same types of traps and mistakes that everyone else falls into as well. But yeah, but this isn't obviously to dismiss the demonic side of things. You're gonna have to address that issue for certain and entirely. The demonic does exist. You're being tempted on a regular basis and regularly. So there's no point in you taking responsibility for any of these temptations as if you actually had committed this sin. It's the same exact principle as Jesus in the wilderness, except you're not even fasting, but you're still being tempted and enticed. That's pretty pathetic on your end, that you're going on about your days and you're being tempted by things that didn't even bother facing Jesus, and you're over here just being the sort of individual that thinks that you're this super Christian, but you're not at that level, or even at my level. And that's even sadder, because I'm actually able to really lead by example for many other individuals, and you just aren't getting it. You would much rather believe what is more convenient for you to believe, and you're suffering the consequences for it. But yeah, grace and peace be multiplied to you. The grace is to know what I'm saying, the peace to know that I sent from God, and the mercy is to actually be able to receive these graces and sayings. And the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ be with you all, and the love of the Lord Jesus Christ reigning in your hearts be with you all. But yeah, so the demonic side of these things, most of these problems just come because of that very simple fact. And what is that word? I'm trying to figure it out really quickly. I think the word is how you live in denial. That's what realistically what you're doing. You're living in denial about it, and you're too much of a coward to realistically really address that situation completely. And you're just like, well, but it'll make your life 10 times easier, like it made mine. Where I was actually finally able to discern that I was just being tempted on a regular basis. I wasn't even falling into lust, but it was the fact that the devils would actually see what I was scrolling through on Instagram, and automatically I would feel tempted to lust after another woman. Uh, but then I would just shrug it off, and it would just be like nothing. So the problem is there is a problem, but it's not you actually falling into sin. It's the fact that the devils are coming inside of your life to actually be able to tempt you to fall into sin. So the temptations lead to sin, and that's just something that needs to be understood within yourself. That the temptations themselves are not sins. If Jesus Christ was tempted in the wilderness, what would that imply? He didn't fall into sin because he was perfect, or else God wouldn't have bothered, would have thrown this little, individual out right away and completely dismiss this person as the Messiah. Or obviously God the Father knew his soul, so maybe not, right? But still, you know, that's just something that you need to be able to adapt within your own, mentalities, and trying to equate it inside of your formula of life for you to actually be able to understand and know for certain what is really going on, because you're realistically just working a lot harder. And that's probably one of the saddest things about it, is just the fact that you're making this, walk with Christ that much difficult and that much more harder, just because you don't actually want to admit that you're just being tempted. And then because you're being tempted, you don't want to confess that you're being tempted. You're taking responsibility for these sort of, sins, and you completely dismiss the demonic side of these aspect of it, and you're just like, well, it's just me, it's all me, and I'm the wretched sinner. And then you're crying out to God, and you're praying. This is basically God trying to answer your prayer for you through me. You're crying out to God, saying that I'm struggling, and you're crying out to him, and you're doing all these other sort of things, but you're just being tempted. If you actually fall into temptation, what does that mean? This is sin. What does that imply? That you fell into sin, but you're just being tempted. What you're struggling with is temptations, but that isn't a sin in itself. What you're struggling with is a guilty conscience, but that is a sin, and that's just something that you need to be able to understand as well. You're beating yourselves up, and that is not something that is very godly. Penitence and contriteness is totally different than you actually just beating yourself up and feeling guilty about something that you realistically haven't done, and that's a sin in itself. It falls under the category of self-loathing, and just like, wow, I'm just this horrible individual that's just so stupid, and other things like that. I'm never amount to nothing, and this is just the type of person that I am, Lord, and I know I can't do anything without you. I mean, realistically, you're gonna have to cut it out. He could take you to that level, and he could put you there to that, to that extent. But all of it is going to be done for his glory, and through him either way. So he can finally get you out of the mire and out of the muck, and clean you up, and that way you actually look like a normal, sane, rational human being. Or you could just, reject his hand that he's offering to you, and continue wallowing in that mire and in that mud, completely feeling sorry for yourselves, and living that sort of, even in this society, it's so frowned upon for individuals to just continue living like that and just beating themselves up over nothing, when realistically everybody just makes mistakes. Everyone holds themselves to this perfect standard, and that's why they beat themselves up. And they just continue living this sort of lifestyle out where, I've already been there. I crashed my car, right? I was just so disappointed within myself. I was basically just crying so hard to God, because of how stupid I, in short, was for actually doing something like that. But I didn't even care about the car. It wasn't even anything. I'll just buy another car. It's just what I was just saying. It was just the fact that, I just repeated the same old cycle and the same old, pattern where, I actually have a good thing, and completely ruin it. And that's just basically where I was at. And that's why I was just so disappointed within myself, because I was just such a failure and such a screw up. And I know I was just talking about that, but I was just like, dang, I mean, I just felt so bad about it, and just felt horrible within myself, for me to realistically really be like, again, I messed up something good, and, and I just didn't like it. But again, I let it go. It still sucks, but it's just something that I need to be able to confess within myself, and to realistically really confront that issue, or I'm never going to get better. And I'm never going to, learn the easy way of just continue, thinking that, just being overly confident, and that just seems to be one of my main flaws. It's just how confident I actually am, and realistically, Christ just bases me quickly after that. I mean, certain things are just like, yeah, cool, and other things like that, but for the most part, there just seems to be like this pecking order. Yeah, there just seems to be this order with Christ that you automatically need to address and view every single one of these gifts and every single one of these talents that you have in this lifetime as graces and as God given completely and 100%. Whether you're a quick learner, whether you're actually able to process these things at a rational level, or you're just logical or rational, or you're actually able to finally see these things clearly in a different light than how you previously viewed these things. All these things themselves have to deal with, graces and God opening your eyes to what you're capable of doing through Him and Him alone. Everybody has gifts, everybody has graces, everybody has talents. People can sing. These individuals have gifts from God. People can rap. I don't want to say rap, but I would much rather prefer to say poetry, because people can write poetry, and that's a gift from God. And people are actually able to be vocal with their emotions, to be able to communicate what they are feeling exactly, to the point where obviously these individuals are actually able to get other people to understand what they are saying. It's at that level that they actually understand. That's a gift in itself. And yeah, I mean, it's basically it. For you to be able to apply it to the forms that it needs to take inside of your lives, or the forms that it does take in your lives, is something else entirely. I already know you've been so blind to these things all of your life, so you're not going to get it just like that. Or maybe, through grace, Christ is actually able to help you get it just like that. But for the most part, He wants you to be able to build that habit and build that level of knowledge and experience, to know that you're going to have to work for these sort of things. You're going to have to show Him essentially that you actually care. You care to actually reach that level. You care to impress Him. You care to actually be able to, please Him, and to reach that sort of level, instead of you trying to impress others and being people pleasers. You are all centered and focused on finally being after His own heart, instead of after being the hearts of men and the praises of men, because Christ notices, in short and in all honesty, which is just something that you actually need to be able to understand, to be able to grasp, because you don't know that, right? Christ is just so polite, and He's just such a polite individual, but none of that means that He's ignorant, or He doesn't actually notice any of the things that you actually are suffering, or your flaws, right? He notices all. There's just been way too many times where Christ just completely called me out of something that I didn't think He was gonna call me out on it, and I was just like, wow, He noticed. And it's like, wow, He said something. It's like, okay, man, I clearly don't know what I'm actually, I clearly don't know the God that I'm serving, right? And I'm over here just thinking that He's not going to be like that. He's not gonna call me a little abomination, or He's not gonna call me a worm, and call me other things like that. And how you essentially handle these sort of things in themselves is what makes all the difference. That's what matters more. Christ is gonna call you all of these things, but how you react, and how you react, right? How you react initially, and how you cope with these sort of types of talks with Him, it makes all the differences to the types of results that you're actually going to see. He's going to call you an abomination, and you obviously have to really recognize what that word means, to really see the definition of it, really view yourself as to that minimal atomic level of how much of an abomination you actually are, to that understanding, and realistically really be able to understand and grasp how holy God actually is. And He's obviously not saying that for nothing. He's obviously implying it with the full weight of what that word actually means. That's just something that you need to be able to recognize and address, or there's no point, in all honesty. Or it's never gonna produce any change. I've been there. He called me an abomination. It hurt like hell, dude, in all honesty, because I already had that foreknowledge that God is love and all these other things. And I was just like, wow, it hurts so much. I was doing everything that I possibly could to actually be able to please Him and to make Him happy, and then for Him to, it's not that I felt betrayed or backstabbed, but it's just something that I thought He would do it in another means or another way. I thought He would actually get me through these sort of abominable things that I was committing on a regular basis, and that's how I was actually gonna get over these sort of sins that I was struggling with. But that's not how it happened. And now afterwards, once these things were I was actually able to, finally recognize that he's gonna be like that and say those sort of things. You're more appreciative of it because now you actually know and recognize that he doesn't owe you anything. He didn't have to tell you a single thing. Could have let you be blind and be like, well, whatever. You're my little saint. You're my little this and that. He could let you go to these false prophets and false pastors, and then that would be on you, to be appreciative of you actually not doing any of those things, and being grateful of the fact of him actually bringing these sort of sins. So again, the Laodicean principle, to be zealous therefore whoever I rebuke I love. And there's just so many other types of Christians that are not actually willing to admit those sort of things. They're afraid of letting go of their sins because of whatever the case may be, or letting go of these sort of misconceptions that they actually had in the past, because they think it's going to cause their relationship with Christ to fall, or certain things like that. But it doesn't do any of those sort of things in themselves. If you don't confess them or you don't address any of those situations, for sure and for certain you will go into the lake of fire, and that's it. But you're gonna put this strain on Christ, because for some individuals he obviously knows when you will finally address it and confess it. But for others, he already knows that's never going to happen. And I already can tell also, just because of how individuals just think, in the whole mindsets of where individuals essentially have their heads at. I already know where these individuals are in short going to go. They're going to go straight into the lake of fire. Every single one of these Christians in modern Christianity, and every single one of these Christians in these churches, automatically going into the lake of fire. I already have understood that. And the only reasons why I say that they're not going to go is because of God's mercy, and because that's completely unpredictable on my end and on my part. I don't know if he's going to have mercy on these sort of individuals, but to completely take that out of the equation of God's mercy, all of these individuals are going into the lake of fire, which is just something that you need to be able to address and recognize as well. It's just that the path is just so narrow that not anybody can just make it into heaven, and not anybody is going to make it to heaven. These individuals just basically sell these golden tickets to heaven like nothing. By individuals, I mean pastors and shepherds. These shepherds obviously just sell these golden tickets to all these genuine and sincere believers, but these tickets are phonies and fakes, and all of them are going straight to hell. None of them are actually being saved. They have some sort of zeal at first, but then the devil is quick to snatch these sort of virtues away from them through philosophies, through doctrines, theologies, and other things like that, because these individuals are just heavily ignorant of certain scriptures and passages, they believe in false doctrines, and because they believe in false doctrines, they fall into false gospels, and it saves absolutely no one. Christ obviously is calling everyone to repentance, to be the worksman on the table, to finally, you're not falling into sin right now, you're not into sin right now, and to just actually be able to think ahead, right? To realistically really, be that worksman on the table, to etch a 5-pointed star after another 5-pointed star, perfection after perfection, and checkpoint after checkpoint. You're not falling for the same types of sins that you repeatedly fell for, normally and typically. And obviously that has way more merit than you think, to Christ, because now you're not falling for the types of trials and tests that you typically and usually fell into, that Christ is trying to get you to acknowledge that we're destructive and harming your souls. But now you actually have gained some sort of level and knowledge and alternative for you to recognize it and know for certain that there's just no alternative to any of the types of judgments that Christ has given to us for these sort of situations that were going to come inside of everyone's life. Automatically, the judgment for our enemies is to love them. That's that judgment. To bless those that curse you, that's that judgment. Obviously they're commandments, judgments, commandments, one and the same, but for the most part, because you are a servant of the Lord, these are commandments to you, but their judgments also as well. If you take that aspect and that equation out of it, and you just gravitate towards a wise aspect of things and wisdom, and to be a wise individual, you actually are able to recognize, or maybe a psychologist way of thinking, actually able to judge these sort of situations righteously, to be able to let go of these sort of situations that come inside of your lives. You're actually able to live and let go types of mentalities and philosophies, instead of just paying, what is it, evil for evil, and finally being the bigger person for these sort of situations, which was just overall maturity and growth. Every individual has gone through these sort of, checkpoints inside of their lives, but the main premise and priority for you is to ensure that the next time you actually reach that sort of checkpoint, that you're struggling with your sins that you struggle with, because right now you're not struggling with them, then the better off you're going to be, because it just continues building itself into a habit. You're not falling for it again, and then finally you actually are able to deliver yourselves. And the easiest way for you to finally, quit struggling with these sort of sins is just to be completely consumed with biblical topics and biblical things. During the time where I actually was struggling with certain sins, or maybe not struggling, I just had a lot of free time. All I was doing, I was even watching the Bible show on Netflix. I was watching sermons. I was watching Win Worley. I was watching Robert at Sushi, Kenzo at Sushi. I was watching these sort of individuals. I was watching Seneca Sodi. I was doing all these other things. I was watching Trumpet Call of God on YouTube and other things like that, that realistically was actually able to really get me to understand, and really get me to know what God's person actually was, to allow me to understand that the same types of principles that I basically grew up knowing and understanding for certain were very much relevant in this day and age. Is just something that I realistically needed to gravitate towards, because of this modern Christianity was a complete lie. I was being deceived. I believed these promises. I was even beginning, I don't even want to say I was getting angry at God just because it's so horrible, and I don't want to think individuals are going to get away with them getting angry at God because I did, or certain situations like that. But it's just the fact that, these sort of promises of Christ were obviously coming inside of my life, for me to actually be able to accept it and be, willing to accept it, and to know that they're actually true, and then not actually be able to see any of the results. So basically I had half of the secret recipe, and then I'm over here trying to figure out, how to make this recipe and how to make this food so, completely and 100% good. And I wasn't actually able to really understand why, and so these sort of individuals finally put me in the right direction for me to know why the demonic exists. That was one of the main reasons why I was falling flat on my face, repeatedly. Strictness and discipline. I was making horrible use of my time. I was playing video games and other things like that. I was watching secular television. I was listening to secular music, and I was listening to music with profanity and other things like that, and I was just eating pork, and I was, eating shrimp. I wasn't obeying the Sabbath, and there was just so many different things that realistically was actually able to get me to understand that that very same gift that Christ gave to me when I got saved initially, and I took him, as serious as he actually was, of wanting to be obedient to him more, is just something that I should have held on to, instead of listening to these sort of pastors that's just something that you're saved by grace through faith. You don't even have to worry about that. They do it in such a sly and slick manner to be able to rob these sort of virtues away from you, to actually be able to throw your entire walk with Christ away. But sadly, that's just what ends up happening. There's so many other individuals on the face of this earth that just fell for the same types of tactics of the enemy that I fell for, and it's just completely sad. To see individuals are completely and 100% deceived because you were deceived as well, and then for what? For no reason at all. It's just like these individuals just didn't want to learn from your mistakes either. They were just like, well, my pastor is this, I'll get there once I get there. And I was like, I said the same exact things that you're saying. These individuals, it just doesn't click, or it doesn't equate inside of their heads that they're wasting their time, and that you would know exactly what they're actually going through. And it's like exactly what you're going through. I know what you're going through. You're on this supposed walk with Christ, doing these things nonchalant, but that there's a time and place for everything, and other principles like that. But you're also failing to equate how holy God actually is, and just to apply very just common principles that we have already accepted and are integrated in this society, of actually being able to work for what you need to work for. And these things are just not going to be by grace through faith. Not every single one of these things are going to be like that. You're going to have to pick up the Bible. You're going to have to read and watch certain sermons. You're going to actually have to stop being so stubborn and prideful, to be willing to accept that some of these very teachings of mine and teachings of other individuals that are just focused on fruits and virtues and discipline and strictness, you need to be applying immediately and right away. And even the proverbs in themselves that they apply to other old individuals when they're 40, 50 years old, you need to begin practicing these things right away and right now. I mean, I don't know if I'm just the only person that thought like that, or I was just incredibly stupid and irrational. When I began reading like Ecclesiasticus and the Wisdom of Solomon, this is something that I confess. I was like 26. I was like, once I get there, I'll actually practice these sort of, proverbs and wise sayings out. And now looking back, I'm 29. It's just like, how stupid was I? I should have began practicing these things immediately and right away. And it didn't take me until like 2 years later. So recently, right? It didn't take me until 2 years later to actually be able to see how stupid I actually was for even thinking like that. And I was just like, wow, this is, it's embarrassing on my end, but it's, for your benefit, you're actually able to benefit that much more from my mistakes. And I guess that's where it matters, and that's, hopefully, don't let it go in vain. Don't let it go to waste, just because of the fact that you can benefit so much more from it if you let yourselves benefit from it. But yes, I digress. Hmm. But yeah, the demonic and the demonic side of these things, you need to be 100% focused on the remedies of your ailments instead of you being so centered and focused on the ailments themselves, because you're never going to get better. When in the world has, focusing on the headache ever removed it or gotten rid of it? Never. You automatically get up, you get the pills or whatever, leave or whatever, type of pills that you need to take for these sort of ailments that you actually have, and you focus on those sort of principles themselves. And that's the same exact characteristic that you need to apply and carry over to your sinful nature. The main reasons as to why you individuals are repeatedly falling for the same old sins and struggles is because you just don't know how to actually be able to cope, how you're not actually able to address or cope with those sort of situations that are inside of your life. You have nothing that you could fall back on when these sort of situations and trials end up coming inside of your lives. And that's the main reasons as to why you're not actually able to really blow past these sort of tests and trials and really ace these tests. And because I also have been there as well, I've been on that path and road, I'm very experienced. That's just one of the main reasons you get discouraged. You feel so overwhelmed because you're barely beginning to put these things to practice, and you realistically aren't aware, how the types of patterns that these situations come inside of your lives. And the 5 stages of grief, that's basically what it actually is. Every single one of these sort of temptations and tests that come inside of your life come in the same exact format. I'm not saying anger, denial, or grief and depression, acceptance, or those sort of things themselves. I'm saying that they come in the same exact manner. It comes in pride. That's the initial reaction. The pride, confusion, and other things like that. Once I realistically I already understand that, when these sort of tests and trials come inside of my life, I already know, because I'm actually accustomed to realistically going through these sort of temptations. But to be able to articulate it and wear it out and to slow it down, I haven't realistically gotten to the point. It's just because it's so repetitive and annoying to me to be able to go through these sort of tests and trials. That's why I realistically am not so fazed or bothered by it. And it doesn't click in my head to realistically really think about it. But I know for certain that when these sort of reactions, or these tests that cause you to try to deviate yourself from any of Christ's commandments and his judgments, automatically the first thing that's going to pop up is pride. It's going to realistically really get you to be focused and centered on yourself. Nobody can do this to you because you're you, or everybody. It's something else that has to deal, the twisting of scripture. Everybody has to be good and neighborly. Don't you know that? Why are you treating me like this? And that's still pride in itself, that you don't believe that another individual can do that to you because of the amount of worth that you supposedly have in yourself, when everyone has already fallen short of the glory. Hopefully you need to confess, and you want to confess that right away. That is pride. That's going to be the main reasons as to why you don't actually you're not so what's the word, fluent, or not fluent, you're not so fluid like towards these sort of situations and scenarios that come inside of your life, that instinctively and impulsively you automatically obey all of Christ's commandments for these sort of situations as well. And to you, it's just like, well, whatever, nobody can do this to me, and I'm struggling, Lord. I mean, that needs to be dismissed immediately, and that way of thinking needs to go right away. And to put the struggling word inside of your, vocabulary as a Christian, you realistically are not owning up to your own flaws and mistakes, and you're not realistically taking responsibility. That you're making horrible use of your time. You could have gotten over most of these problems that you're struggling with had you have been committed to these things in themselves. I was being bombarded with demonic temptations and problems and issues themselves, and because of the fact that I just, what's the word, it's just during this time and in this situation, I was just so stupid because I was so afraid, and I was living in fear to fight the enemy and to fight these sort of things off. And that's why I was being bombarded, and that's just the saddest thing about it. I was too afraid to actually stop. I already had recognized that I need to fight all of these things. I was more or less just sticking my arms out and being like, no, please don't hit me, demon, type of principle. And to you, it's just like, wow, this is weird. This is crazy. You always talk about spiritual warfare and this and that, and that you're a bully to these devils and other things like that. And to see how you essentially were back before you actually finally were delivered from that mentality, it was very sad and very pathetic on my end. All of it had to do with just other things. I was so afraid of actually being homeless and, finally addressing these sort of issues and situations in my life because I was scared of actually suffering the consequences for my mistakes and my errors. And I try to avoid the situation and the consequences by not admitting my faults and my, very irrational behaviors that I was, in short, just living out on a regular basis. My laziness to realistically be able to view these things according to how Christ views them, and to actually just do the work for the things that I need to do the work for, and not realistically be able to equate these things themselves. So this video is more or less coming out like a testimonial type of video, but it's still meant to be informative, which is just something that you need to be able to understand. You need to be able to recognize and learn the easy way and learn from my mistakes, instead of you just being so judgmental. That's not a very good quality or characteristic to have for anyone, right? You need to be able to have open ears and an open mind, especially if you're trying to look for a remedy to get rid of all of the types of ailments and suffrages that you're experiencing on a regular basis. And these in themselves are 100% torments. Do not let the devil get away with, him coming inside of your life by cloaking it in another word that you're just struggling, or that's just the way that you are. Once you get there, you finally get there. These are torments, and that's just something that you need to be able to confess and be bold about, and that's just a sad thing about it. Many individuals don't want to actually get there because they think that if they do, again, they're actually going to have to suffer more, and they have to suffer the wrath of the devil and the enemy. The devil doesn't get to do everything he wants, so please understand that. Please get to that point of, understanding and knowledge that because of God's divine providence, he's doing that to you, and not because of, what's the word? Because the devil has his own little kingdom down here on earth. This is why he's doing these things to you. It is because of God's divine providence that he's doing these things to you. Hopefully you're actually able to understand that I worded it like that on purpose. God is the one that's uncontrollable by the devil. The devil's being 100% controlled by God. He's being sent in your life to be able to refine you, to be able to teach you some very valuable and harsh lessons of letting go of sin, and to be able to see how destructive and harmful they really are. And you didn't want to view it like that. You were just like, well, whatever, they're just sins, and I'm still here on earth. I'm this perfect Christian. I'm struggling, Lord. Thank you for working through me. Man, it's just kind of sad, I want to just say it in this form and in this example. You basically, this is just you, right? You're like 4 months behind rent, and you owe your landlord 4 months, right? 4 months rent, and essentially you're just telling your landlord that you have to be patient with me, but you don't even bother looking for work. You don't even bother doing anything. You don't bother asking other family members to let you borrow money. You won't even bother taking a loan out. You won't even bother doing anything or taking any of the right steps to finally be able to uh, get, you know, your landlord is money for the rent. And that's just the type of mentality and principles that you people live by and you people are under. And you're just like, well, I'll get there when I get there, and everything's going to be fine, and you don't have to worry about that. But in reality, you need to get up and work right away, and you need to realistically really be able to address and confront these situations that you're gonna have to get uncomfortable. You're gonna have to do certain things that you don't want to do. You're gonna have to be cleaning ladies or whatever else, and you're actually going to have to be able to finally be that worksman on the table and accept that whole principle and philosophy for your lives, and start applying those things to your lives right away. Because if you don't start, it really is now or never for many of you. That philosophy is not just philosophy. That philosophy is a way of life, and it will be a way of life. Obviously, in the future, you'll finally be able to reach that level of understanding and knowledge, as to knowing that there is just no alternative for any of those sort of commandments or any of those sort of ways of life, because it is life itself. Instead of you just being so selfish and enveloped in your own vanity and your own ways of thinking, that how you think and how you approach these sort of situations is correct and right, and that you can't learn a more excellent way to your approach and the ways that you actually live. You're going to continue just negating and dismissing that sort of principle for your life, and never growing and never being able to produce more fruit of your own and bearing more fruit that the Father is glorified. You're asking Christ to prune you, and you're not actually willing to bud any fruits whatsoever. And that's just pretty sad in itself, because that's the type of mentalities that these individuals in short live in. I'm not saying you could be the types of individuals that actually are recognizing or beginning to recognize there's just no alternative to any of Christ's commandments and teachings. You just aren't actually able to integrate it inside of your character, or you're more or less just asking questions as to how to integrate this inside of your lives. And it's just simple. It's just letting go of yourselves and letting go of your pride, for you to actually be able to address it. Or for me, the main issue as to why I wasn't realistically able to integrate these sort of things inside of my lives and into my character, I just didn't know how to cope with these sort of situations. I was basically, like a dry sponge, and trying to get near the water and trying to get close to water, and I just couldn't do it, because I didn't have legs and I didn't have arms. It wasn't until Christ in short just grabbed me and threw me into the sea that I was actually able to finally be able to understand why there was no alternative, and to soak up all the water that there possibly was in the sea for myself to actually be, and still soak up more water, right? He's still teaching me and still letting me know and address those sort of situations themselves, that there's always a more excellent way to the types of teachings I already have given you, that you're already teaching other individuals. And that's just something that you need to understand and recognize, that there's this ultimate growth and this ultimate, walk that is never ending, and you just continue moving forward and advancing, your knowledge and your understanding continually and perpetually, increase for all of eternity. And you're not always going to be in this level of understanding. To you right now, you're not even able to understand how you're actually able to understand more than you already know. But realistically, you'll reach that level and you'll reach that point, and then you'll be able to be this incredible teacher to actually be able to teach more individuals, to help them to understand it, to simplify it in the extent to let them know that these things were realistically everything that was already written in the scriptures. It was just your overcomplicating of it that made it so much more difficult for yourselves in your lives. But yeah, also you just were so focused on the actual infirmity instead of the remedy, and you realistically didn't want to latch on to the ideology either, where you were just continue to just focus on remedies. By remedies, I'm implying wisdom, wise sayings and proverbs and other coping mechanisms and skills that Christ already has given us in the gospel and in the Bible itself entirely. There's just so many coping skills and mechanisms that he's already given us to be able to address these sort of situations in our lives. and then for you to just be so enveloped and focused on these sort of infirmities would be completely erroneous on your end. You need to go out and study yourselves and figure out how other individuals in the Bible actually did it for these sort of situations, instead of just being so complacent and so praying. It's like you're praying to Christ for an answer, and the answer's already in the book, and it's just pretty sad, right? Another thing as well that is going to prevent you and hinder you, automatically the demonic. Most of you are just heavily cursed. You're suffering for the sins of the fathers because none of them have ever obeyed the law of Moses, and because none of them have ever obeyed it, you're cursed with that curse of rebellion and disobedience that you don't actually want to obey, and that's just something that you need to be able to address and confess. That you need to begin obeying. You're gonna curse your children as well, just like your parents cursed you. And yeah, deliverance. You break these curses through the cross, and finally you're actually able to get rid of all of these things. It'll be the great reset for your vessels, your souls, your minds, your souls, your wills, and your emotions, as you begin to actually finally deliver yourselves and purge yourselves of the evil that nasty, disgusting black sponge and shore actually ended up soaking up. And Christ will just turn you into a miracle where you just begin to look like a brand new, fresh out the package sponge through cleaning through the blood of the Lamb. A miracle, truly. It could have not been done through any other means except through Christ himself. And obviously the proof is in him actually teaching me through these sort of works of diligence and sincerity and genuineness of realistically really wanting to be sinless. This is how I short got to this trip, and at this point of my life, because I had a sincere desire to really be sinless and not wanting to accept no as an answer, and just to continue moving forward instead of letting these other bastard shepherds shepherd me. I obviously wanted to know what was the means and what was the way, and that was just the easiest means and way to actually be able to really be sinless, is to just focus on the now, that I'm not falling into sin, and to prepare for the when or if it does actually end up happening, and not to realistically use these sort of keywords in my vocabulary of when it does happen, but if it does happen, and to just continue with that momentum of the if, and just continue working on the if side of things, and just continue beating it and beating it down further and further and further in my head, as well as beating the slate with the 5-pointed star of perfection. And then I'm done with that 5-pointed star, and then I grab another slate and I continue doing the same exact things as I've always been doing. And just continue moving, and checkpoint after checkpoint I continue passing up and with flying colors and going through these sort of tests. And finally it gets to the point, because I've just been working at it so frequently, it's just a habit of mine, and I don't have to focus or be so enveloped in what if this happens or what if that happens, because I finally am able to understand and recognize that there is just no alternative to any of the teachings that Christ actually has given to us, because this is perfect way, and it's his perfect way, and there has to be a complete and total 100% self-denial on your end when you actually begin being this sort of Christian, or you're never going to see the results that I actually saw. I didn't have that way of thinking that because we're all Christians, we all have to be nice to each other, or because we're all humans, all have fallen short of the glory. You know that you need to be neighborly. Why are you being rude to me and disrespectful? It was more or less just, okay, I'm moving on, and thank you. And so I definitely need individuals to copy and imitate that virtue, as well as recognizing that these things are really easy, and not being so phased and confident in the possibility of it actually manifesting in your life, for you to know for certain that these things are actually real, and instead of being so cautious and this and that, to just go in the side of the pool, and you're going to recognize that it's 4 feet deep. That wasn't even as deep as you thought. You more or less were just so overwhelmed, hyped up by these devils that were trying to make you afraid of taking the leap of faith. That way you never did, and sadly, it worked. And but don't believe them anymore. Confidence is not key, but confidence in your God needs to be integrated inside of your mentalities as to what is actually going to get you to see these sort of results inside of your lives, instead of you being so repeatedly doubtful and what's that word, where you want to see with, you want to believe with signs and with sight. You don't actually want to walk by faith. You need to stop that whole mentality right away, because I used to think like that also. You just need to do it, because you're never gonna see any of the things that you more than half of the things that you actually are doing, you're not even gonna bother seeing in this day and in your lifetimes. You're gonna see when you actually are in heaven, or when Christ actually returns, what you actually were doing. You're gonna be like, whoa, that's crazy, and that's pretty insane. So all of it has to do with you actually being beat down further and further in the faith that you have in Christ, and that way it makes it harder and harder for you to be removed and taken out uh, of the faith. Easy principle to be able to understand, right? The faith in Christ and the faith in your faith of who you know God to be. I know I touched briefly on it, or very, how the devil is just this person you have this enormous faith in. Yeah, cut it out. That's why you're not engaged in spiritual warfare, is because you're that terrified of the devil because of the amount of faith you have in him. You're not as scared in God as you actually previously thought and exalted yourselves to. You need to take that mentality out of your lives entirely and completely, of exalting yourselves for whatever the case may actually be, and just humble yourself before the Lord and continue moving forward. I know it sucks. It's overwhelming. You need to live at peace, but you realistically have to work. I mean, that's horrible. You can't say those sort of things. You need to realistically be happy about these sort of trials and temptations that come inside of your life, because it's never gonna happen again. And yeah. So thank you for listening. Now I'm gonna get into the deliverance side of this video. Be casting all these devils. That way you're actually able to understand and grasp what I actually am trying to say, because they definitely affect your processing, your mind, how you actually think, how you are actually able to learn. They affect all of that. I know you individuals want to be quick learners. It's not going to happen, because you actually have demons that are inside of your life causing these detours on purpose. I know you want to be vocal in what you actually are experiencing and feeling. It's not going to happen either, because these devils come inside of your life because they know that testimonies are powerful. But I'm delivering you from all these things, especially pride. That way you're actually able to recognize and discern that there's just no alternative. And that way you're actually able to finally begin working the worksman on the table type of, commandment for your lives, because that's what it actually is. You didn't have the level of knowledge and understanding as to why Christ was saying the things that he said, but that was the overall premise behind it. But hopefully now you're actually able to view these things with a better understanding, and these teachings as well with a different understanding, instead of the same old, oh, whatever, this is my life, and thank you God for dying for my sins, and I'm not gonna bother living for you, or denying myself completely and 100%. When Bob and Sally gets in my face, you already know what I'm gonna do. But thank you for this grace through faith. You need to stop and cut it out right away, because that's just the type of mentality that you actually are living, and that's just how Christ actually sees you. He doesn't see you like this individual that he's struggling. He sees you as this individual that knows they could do better and yet doesn't. And that's just pretty sad. And that's something that Christ himself opened my eyes towards as well, is that I already know that you're capable of doing better, and yet here you are just selling yourselves short, and trying to cheat me, and you're gonna have to suffer for that sin if you continue with it up, and you're gonna end up going into the lake of fire. So just cut it out. It's just like, well, okay. I didn't know you were gonna say anything. Good. So yeah, I'm gonna ask Jesus what else he wants to say. Focus on your internal characters. and focus on ensuring that you actually are centered on, the overall intent as to why all these situations come inside of your life. That way you're actually able to understand God better. And because you're actually able to understand God better, you're actually able to understand these trials that come inside of your life and the types of stressful situations that end up coming in. All of it has to deal with being faith-based, and, growing your eternal character. That way you begin being more and more Christ-like, to the point that you actually look like Christ and you actually are Christ, quote unquote. You're a Christian, so to speak. And what else? And yeah, I mean, these are very basic, healthy principles for you to apply for within yourselves, just to actually have a better mental health, and a more rational and peaceful way of thinking in a life. It's not a peaceful life to be petty, because you're always worried about another individual scamming you or being as petty to you as they were to them. The Holy Spirit obviously wants every single individual to fight and to not be cowards, as well as to be confident in the Lord and to stop placing so much faith in Satan. It infuriates God, and that should be enough said. Think ahead and still keep praying for a more excellent way than everything that I haven't mentioned, because obviously you're going to be beat down further. What I actually have mentioned, and then your practices, as you already have common knowledge and understanding that it's just nothing and it's whatever. The overall hype and overwhelmingness of it all is not a part of the temptation process that ends up coming inside of your life. It's already integrated. It's like kind of like a shortcut, I want to say, for it, because you already have recognized that there's a more excellent way to it, and because you already know that there's a more excellent way to it, you're already currently working on what I actually have mentioned to get to that understanding of that knowledge. That's the more excellent way to what you're practicing and doing to your life. Is that making sense? Hopefully, yeah. So yeah, I'm looking more virtues, graces, and blessings inside of your vessel. That way you actually are able to benefit, and do everything that I mentioned and all the blessings that I mentioned as well. That way you have an abundance of fruits and not an abundance of wealth, an abundance of trials and tests and tribulations. That way you have every means to perfect your eternal character, and everything else in between. And sadly, you're going to see some of the problems that were inside of your life that you were actually passing with flying colors. And now you're not going to be able to pass it because you prayed for it and it just seems too overwhelming. It's just a mental issue. If before you weren't praying for it, these tests were coming either way, you were passing, and it wasn't until you actually had equated that this is the prayer that you prayed for, these tests are now these sort of situations become that much harder. It's just mental aspects, and that's just something that you need to get over immediately, because it's not even anything. If you could just get back to that mindset as if you never prayed for any of these tests and trials that come inside of your life, that way it's able to help you to pass these tests, then by all means do it, and definitely begin doing it right away, because it's just so unnecessary and so avoidable. But what's the point? The Holy Ghost still wants you to fight, though. He doesn't want you individuals being lazy ever. And he definitely wants you to fight for the innocent, the weak, the bullied, the harassed, and other things like that. Amen. Oh, excuse me. I was yawning. Thank you for listening. Pray for others. Pray for others to accept this message as well, and deliver them, and still break the curses up, and generational curses and ancestral sins and curses as far back as you have to. The curse of the bastard and every one of those things in between. Cast them out by the legion, because you're gonna have to. You can't just do it one by one. I mean, it's gonna take so much more longer. So I would just cast them out by the legion, and the main one causing the problems themselves be cast out. Do it in a smart way. Stop working so hard when you could just do these things in an easy, smarter, intelligent way. Instead, you want to be legalistic and you're suffering the consequences for it. It's a sin. Anything you're suffering the consequences for should automatically be understood as sins. Except for Christ dying on the cross, right? Why did he die? But for the most part, it's because you actually have fallen into sin, or it's just some sort of, um, perfect plan of salvation, which is just something that you need to be able to, admit and accept. That way, you stop being so angry and mad about this not so perfect life that nobody even has. Amen. Love, joy, peace, forgiveness, acceptance. What is that word? Oh, it's forgiveness, when you're actually able to let go of situations, or to overlook situations that people aren't actually able. They're very forgiving people, and that's just something that you need to be able to understand. You need to adopt that virtue for your lifestyles and overlook all these sort of situations that end up coming inside of your life that other individuals are able to overlook. Deliver yourselves, because these curses are just placed there to make your lives harder. That's the real reason why. You cannot dismiss deliverance out of this equation of Christianity. Everyone is called to engage in spiritual warfare and in deliverance, and I'm going to be helping all of you out to ensure that you'll actually finally begin to build that into a habit and understanding, to know that you can't go one day without deliverance and spiritual warfare or prayer. Amen. Thank you. Love you. Bye.